Well, I'd been ill for about 4 or 5 years before I even heard of HIV, and it started off with a sort of flu bug that just wouldn't go away, it just carried on, and then I had started having problems walking, my legs were bad, and then I got sent to lots of different consultants. None of them could find out what was wrong with me. And it wasn't until 85 when I got taken into hospital with meningitis. And just out of the blue, someone suggested testing for HIV, which I'd never heard of. I think it was called something else then. And they tested for it and discovered I was positive. But the results took weeks and weeks to come through. And eventually I got called up at work, and over the telephone in the middle of the workshop with lots of people around me, they sort of said, yeah, you're positive to HIV. If you want to talk to us further, do come in. So at that point I was thinking, I'm going to die. Absolutely no support whatsoever, no counselling or anything like that, which we have nowadays. And then I did go and have a chat with them, and the first thing they said to me was that the life expectancy at the moment for people with HIV, or what it was then, is somewhere around 18 months. So I was geared up from that point on, really, just to live for 18 months and no longer. I think it was early 86 I was diagnosed with it, but it means I'd actually had symptoms of the illness since the end of 79. I'd gone up to London to live, and I was a young guy around town and having quite a lot of fun, and it was during that time, really, I think, that I must have picked up the virus. But, and a lot of my friends, my social group at the time, they died within 18 months, 2 years of getting the virus or being diagnosed with it. And they were just dropping like flies around me, and I just kept going. No idea why. Even now, these days, I don't understand why I'm still here. But I absolutely ignored it for the first, I don't know, 3 months or so, something like that. Just completely shut it out, didn't tell anyone, carried on life exactly as normal, apart from going to the clinic for the tests they wanted to do at the time. And then one Sunday I was at church singing with the choir, and at the end of the Mass, they'd all gone, and I just sat down at the back of the church and just burst into tears and cried for about half an hour, just completely, and that was when I accepted the fact that I had it. Again, I didn't have anyone really to support me in that. And I told 1 or 2 people at my church about it, just to talk to someone and try and get some sort of help, really, to cope with it. One person was absolutely superb and went on to become one of my best friends, and she supported me for years and years after that. But someone else obviously had other ideas, and they went to talk to the reporters at The Sun, and The Sun decided that it was a very good story, and came and invaded the Mass at church, took lots of photographs around the church, and I ended up appearing in The Sun as an AIDS carrier organist, which was absolutely horrendous. That was worse than getting the virus. And the damage it did to my family, it was horrific. My surname's quite unique. Everyone knew exactly who it was when the thing was published with my name on it. And they tried to make up all sorts of stories as well. I lost my job. I was sacked as organist at the church. No one would even shake hands with me in the church as soon as they found out about the HIV. It was just horrific, and my family, my parents, as soon as I knew it was coming out, I rang my parents in Wales, and they drove during the night from North Wales down to my grandparents on the south coast to try and get there before the papers arrived, and failed. So my grandparents had read it by the time they got there, and my grandparents didn't speak to me from that day until the end of their lives. They just didn't want to know. And that problem, that started off really how I coped with the illness. I mean, it was just on my own. Nobody helped at all. It was pretty horrific. People just reckoned that, you know, by being in the same room as you, they could catch it. And more than that, I think people assumed all sorts of ideas about how you had caught it, without knowing the truth at all, and without taking on board the fact that I didn't even know the thing existed when I got it. But people made the thing into a moral issue instead of it being an illness which they could help with. And the very people that I thought would be helpful, my friends at church, and they just didn't want to know at all. In fact, they were some of the worst for being judgmental and not wanting me to be there anymore. People of my age at the time, in their mid-20s, a young guy in particular, Junior, he was only 19. I actually played the organ for his funeral. And, you know, for someone to die at that age from this illness, and nobody really even then sort of understood what the illness was or what it was doing or where it had come from. It was just like a mystery illness which nobody wanted to talk about except to point the finger at you. And certainly the number of people that I lost, number of friends, very close friends that I lost in that period, it was horrendous. Myself, I certainly didn't feel so threatened really sort of towards the end of the 90s. You know, I think it was more accepted at that point. Now it seems that, particularly in the West Midlands, it seems as though there's a tremendous sort of influx of people who still regard HIV as being a moral issue and not an illness, not just an illness. At the church I'm at the moment, I spoke to some people from Eritrea, and we've got another group from Nigeria, and I put out a few tentative feelers to see if there was any way that my having HIV, I could be supportive towards people who I assumed within their community would have HIV, because that's you know, in Nigeria especially, there's a you know, high incidence of it. And I was met with absolute horror that I would want to mix with those people, those sort of people. And it's almost as though we've gone back, and you know, to how it was at the beginning. They're the lowest of the low, immoral members of society. Yeah. And I think that sort of has made it much more secretive again, with all the problems that you know, brings out, yeah. And the potential for scandal. And you know, well, I think one of the problems has been that as soon as there were drugs around which you were able to limit the effects of the virus, to stop it replicating, once that they'd arrived on the scene, people almost assumed that there was a cure. In some ways, the fact that there are now drugs that limit HIV is one of the worst things that's happened in terms of prevention, because it's no longer hot news. People are no longer dying after 18 months, 2 years. So people aren't worried about catching it and dying quickly. a lot of young people I've spoken to about HIV. I talked to a school not very long ago, a group of 17, 18-year-olds. Their attitude was that, well, if I get it now, it's going to be 9, 10 years before any symptoms show, and then after that, by that time, they'll have found a cure and everything will be fine. This is the sort of attitude. And so I think in some ways, the drugs have been a sort of mixed blessing. And certainly for me, I've had some pretty horrific side effects to some of the HIV drugs especially. All sorts of strange rashes and yeah. There's still a bit of a stigma. I wish in a way that HIV wasn't still linked in with sexually transmitted diseases, because that's another point, you know, that if it was just in a different clinic somewhere away from the STD block, it would be perhaps easier for people to you know, just go in and be tested. But I think for a lot of people, they don't think it's going to happen to them. I mean, it's different for me. I didn't know the illness was around, so I didn't have a choice in it. But I think people just don't, with something like this, they just don't think they're going to get it. They're going to be the lucky ones, and it's someone else's problem. I still don't understand what all this barebacking is about, why people have unprotected sex in high-risk situations. I mean, if you're going out and spending the night with someone who you've never met before, then surely, you know, you protect yourself in all sorts of ways, like you wouldn't leave your wallet lying around with your credit cards in. But they're still quite prepared to have the most intimate contact with that person, not knowing at all what their health is and whether they have the virus or not. In some ways, I don't understand why an HIV test isn't a compulsory thing when you go in for a blood screening. You know, they test to see how your liver's working, or sort of other things, test for diabetes. Why not test for HIV at the same time? It just needs to be talked about more. It's just forgotten about completely. People don't talk about it. And if it became into conversation more, if people saw it in the paper, in Hello magazine or whatever, or the ones you get with all the X Factor stuff and the pop stuff. I mean, there's nothing in there about HIV either, and surely those sort of magazines are, you know, an ideal way of getting through to people. I mean, there's a whole generation of people, not just in this country, but across the world, of young people who never got to have a life because of this virus. Friends of mine, you know, I told you earlier about the 19-year-old, but huge numbers of people in their early 20s who died from this illness, and it's never mentioned, it's never thought about, talked about. They just disappeared, and nobody ever mentioned them anymore. And to me, that's just tragic. And I think if people knew a bit more about that and how many people actually did die from the virus and are still dying from the virus. I mean, out in Africa and places like that, there's no treatment available for a lot of people. So, you know, they're just back at the stage we were 30 years ago. I find that really quite difficult to live with, that all my friends who died from HIV just were written off. I think it's essential that people start talking about it as a normal, everyday topic of conversation, not something outside of it, not something special, or, you know, it needs to be in the mainstream and not something you go to the clinic for. And I think you know, it's absolutely ludicrous that young people are not protecting themselves and making sure they haven't got it already, you know. So.